New Zealand's in a funny place at the moment. And how we got there, I guess, is a subject of debate and discussion. I had an editorial view on that, which I shared with you yesterday. How we get out of it, though, would be, frankly, the more immediate question. And so opinions on that will be divided as well. But first of all, you need to know about this problem that you're talking about. Okay, you can't solve something unless you can actually know what it is, how it came to be, and who's responsible and who needs to change behaviour. Is it us, the hoi polloi, the masses, the little people of New Zealand, the ones who make up democracy? Or is it the institutions and the leaders of those institutions that need to change? If there is a cleavage between the trust that we have of our institution, our institutional leaders, I would suggest to you that it's not our fault. But in commentary that I've seen from both left and right of the political divide in the last 48, 72 hours, it would seem that us, ordinary New Zealanders, the hoi polloi, the masses, the ones that don't have power, the ones that aren't institutional knowledge, are being held essentially responsible for not trusting the law, politicians, the mainstream media, the courts, public sector, basically a whole variety of institutions that have been set up for our particular advantage. And the suggestion is that there is something wrong with us. We've sort of not only lost trust, as been outlined in the Edelman Trust Barometer in these institutions, but we're also lacking social cohesion in this country, a premise of the latest report from the Helen Clark Foundation. Now, the Helen Clark Foundation is an interesting organisation. It was set up, as you would probably expect, by Helen Clark. It includes a group of people that I would suggest you probably hover on the liberal fringe, or not the fringe, but on the liberal mainstream of society and of politics. I don't think there's any question about that. I don't see too many conservative voices. They're a think tank in exactly the same way that the New Zealand Initiative is a think tank. I would suggest to you that probably the Helen Clark Foundation would stray to the left of that think tank ideology, and that the New Zealand Initiative would stray to the right. Neither of them are extremist organisations, and you would hope that they would still use empirical data and coming to the conclusions that they do. They all stimulate public debate and discussion, and from the platform's point of view, that is a good thing. Joining us to talk, because he actually authored this report, or co-authored it at least, is economist and former, I think, NZIER chief economist, Shamubeel Eaqub, and he joins us now. Lovely to have you on the show again. Welcome to our show this afternoon.
Nice to see you again.
Listen, first thing, Shamubeel, why did you write this report? I know the research was carried out by research firm Talbot Mills, but why did you feel a need to address this particular issue?
Well, it actually started with the UK's social cohesion report which was called the Khan Review. And that was all asking about what's going on in the UK and why are we finding so much pressure and anger in our community. This was after the riots and those kinds of things. And in that report, they talked about the kinds of issues that I think we're starting to fear in New Zealand. But the second thing was they talked about this survey they do in Australia that has been running since 2007 that consistently measures social cohesion in Australia. But we don't have a comparable thing. We've got bits and pieces like the Edelman Trust survey that you talked about before, Michael, which are helpful, but it doesn't take the whole gamut of information. So that was the reason. So I went and asked a bunch of donors asking, can you give me some money to do the survey? And I got enough money, but not enough to do as big as Australia. So I asked Talbot Mills if they could do it for a discount, and they did. I gave my money for free, and the Helen Clark Foundation is just hosting it because it needs to live somewhere. So that was the kind of the background to why we did it.
How do you? Well, I'm interested in the obvious question: what is social cohesion, and then how would you measure it? So, what is social cohesion to start with?
It's a really great question, and it's one of those really hard to capture things. And I guess the way that we think about social cohesion is it's almost the state of play of our culture and institutions. And what I mean by this, those in the courts and the police and the politics that you talked about before, through the connection that we have with each other, with our community, and these organizations. And a big thing that underlies all of that is trust. But it's not just that. It's this broader feeling of the glue that holds it together. So we can tackle those big and small issues. We can still have a debate, but still have a beer afterwards. So we can have that considered important conversations and come to decisions that enough of us get around that we can sustain things. And in some ways, I think with social cohesion, it's almost easier to see it when it's not there, the opposite. So the spectrum goes something like you're a cohesive society, you're a fractured society, you're a polarized society. When you get polarized, you do big shifts when you get changes in politics. It's hard to find middle ground. And it's a hard description, right?
It is. That's why I'm interested in how you would then measure something that's hard to describe.
Yeah, and so the measurements I think make a little bit more sense because then you can see the kinds of dimensions we're trying to get a sense of people's experiences, perceptions, and beliefs across these kind of 5 key dimensions. And they are the sense of belonging. Do you belong feel like you belong in the nation? Do you feel like you belong in your local community? Your sense of worth. Do you feel like you're financially well off? Do you feel like you're respected? Do you feel like you're valued? Social inclusion and justice, whether you think our justice system, our court system is fair, those kinds of things. Participation, do you feel like you can participate in community, in courts, in elections, those kinds of things. And the last one is around what kind of things you accept, what kinds of things you reject. So under that banner are things like discrimination. Under that banner would be whether we like multiculturalism and those kinds of things. So it's quite a big, broad suite of indicators. And the reason why we chose this is not because I have a particular view that any of these measures are perfect, but because these questions are asked by the Australians and we can ask them here and we can put them side by side.
All right. Now, the Edelman research that I talked about on yesterday, that's international, and I assume the standard is applied internationally as well across each of the countries. Before I come to your report, I'm interested in that particular case when you're talking about social cohesion, and I guess that was sort of measured in that Edelman Trust Index too. The countries that were most considered, I suppose, that trusted their institutions more were countries that weren't necessarily democracies. I think 10 of the 12 top were not what you'd call democratic institutions and certainly didn't have Western values or Western traditions underpinning them. Do you think that tells us anything?
Well, it tells us that you can have trust in institutions in different settings. There's no one perfect way. I think there is this kind of arrogant view that there's only one way of organizing society. So I don't know if it says that it's necessarily right for here or there, but it works in certain settings in certain ways. And institutions are always reflections of culture rather than the other way around, right? It kind of
You'd like to
feeds on
think
each
so.
other.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, look, I don't have a strong view that there is a perfect model of democracy or institutional settings that are perfect for any one place. So these things are always morphing and changing. But I think what we have seen in the Edelman Trust Survey is that decline in trust across mature democracies over the course of the last couple of decades. So this is not like a new thing, right? We have been seeing that erosion of trust over time. And there's lots of theories in terms of why that is, but I don't know for sure why that is happening.
Now, in your report that you wrote, based upon the survey carried out by the research firm Talbot Mills and answering the questions that you've outlined for us just now, and thank you for doing so, you say that we're seeing increasing polarisation. We're likely to see more volatile politics in this country, less certainty around policies, and that means business, community and life becomes unpredictable. I'll come to that in just a second. But you also then make the comparison with Australia and say that in all of these dimensions that you've talked about this afternoon, we compare poorly with Australia. In fact, you say, quote unquote, we suck in comparison. What are the specific areas in which we are so distinct from Australia when it comes to social cohesion?
It was across a wide range of things, but a few things stood out for me. First was, for example, the share of New Zealanders who feel financially comfortable, only about a third in New Zealand, but 60% in Australia. So we're about half of us, half as well off as Australia in many ways. 55% of New Zealanders said they were happy. In Australia, it was 78%, more than three quarters. In New Zealand, a quarter of people reported that they went without food sometimes or often. In Australia, it's half that. So we're seeing these divergences that are opening up in different places, and I was really surprised at how big the gap was, because our two countries are similar in many ways, but to see these same questions answered in quite different rates was very surprising to me and
Mm.
disappointing.
But interestingly, of those three examples you've just given to me, I'll deal with the happiness one in a second. Two of them are sort of interlinked, really, and that's the financial worth, the sort of
Mm.
GDP per person or per capita
Yes,
issue, and
economic
which,
performance.
yeah, and we're clearly underperforming in comparison to Australia. And obviously, we're seeing that in record migration countries,
Mm.
statistics as well. Is the truth of the matter is that New Zealand is just a poor country getting poorer, and Australia is roughly keeping its standard of living, perhaps increasing? Is it all just down to we're losing a bit of cohesion because we're simply not growing sufficiently to support the expectations that we have of what the state will provide?
I think so. I think a lot of it is to do with our economic underperformance.